And now the plain truth. As you've seen on our show, the government at times tells you lies. The deception is historic and continuous. The government needs to be exposed because it cannot be trusted to expose itself. We live in exciting and fearful times. Most of you today are not afraid of big crime or big business or big labor. Rather, most of us are most afraid of big government.
All right, folks, there is a lot going on right now. Decisions being made that are unprecedented and will have an overreaching impact on what it means to live in the United States of America.
But whereas in the past, the time ends, the war is over, the rules go back to normal. Is this time going to be different? There they examine the erosion of the rule of law and our rights, starting with the Bush administration and continuing on with the Obama administration. It's a detailed account of everything from torture, targeted killing, extraordinary rendition, warrantless wiretaps, an overall massive and unchecked surveillance state, indefinite detention, religious discrimination and profiling, and so on.
You're seeing innocent Americans being wiretapped. You're seeing them put on, these kill lists, and you're seeing people being investigated for doing something as benign as taking pictures of buildings.
Now, the changes include allowing agents to search a group or person proactively without having to make any records of it, allowing them to tail people more than once during a proactive assessment, searching people's trash to find a potential informant, attending up to 5 meetings of a group undercover, eliminating extra supervision of investigations of politicians or journalists if they are witnesses and not suspects, and eliminating any protections for low-profile blogs.
You cannot, under the Patriot Act, even tell a judge under oath in a public courtroom that you received a warrant written by a federal agent.
We are being monitored by what is called FBI's, quote, Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. Oh boy, how Orwellian does that sound? It apparently contains 161,948,000 suspicious activity files on tens of thousands of Americans, including your employment history, financial documents, phone numbers, pictures, and any other information that the authorities can gather on you. Here comes the twist: on people who have not been charged with any crime. They are just considered suspicious. Not only can the FBI file these reports, but local police can. But not only can local police, your neighbor can turn you in. If your neighbor reports suspicious activity, then it goes in the file. That means they can collect all of your information. They can listen to your phone calls, they can read your emails. Whatever you do that you think is private is not private. The American government is collecting that information without a warrant.
Any cell phone, yours included, can be pinpointed, even if you never make a call.
Consider your cell phone your own personal tracking device, like it or not.
A federal judge has ruled that FBI does not need to get a warrant in order to put a GPS tracking device on your vehicle. All they have to do is think that something you're doing is suspicious enough to put the device on your vehicle, and it's fine.
Researchers reported that iPhones and Droids tracked your every location and then stored that material.
Well, careful what you tweet. An online privacy group suing the Department of Homeland Security over its recently announced plans for a system to monitor blogs, message boards, and social media sites like Twitter, Facebook.
And the idea from the brains over at the DHS headquarters will allow the government to keep data on anybody who uses any sort of news or media outlet to share, report, or stay informed.
About $11.3 million to monitor. Among that was monitoring for news media stories which, quote, reflect adversely on the Department of Homeland Security or U.S. federal government.
Whoa, so
monitoring
it's like
for criticism.
We're going to spend 10 million, 11 million bucks to see if anybody doesn't like us.
Yeah, that's part of the contract.
And make a note of it?
Is to monitor for criticism, to monitor for dissent.
That would allow the U.S. government to blacklist websites and, according to some, break the internet.
It would basically allow any private company or person to shut down almost any website. You wouldn't even get a hearing before they shut down your website.
Whether or not those sites are actually engaged in copyright infringement doesn't apparently need to be proven by a third party or a court. It's strictly up to the entertainment industry. In other words, if they don't like you, you're shut down.
An international agreement that lumps piracy and counterfeiting into one, which has been discussed behind closed doors for nearly 6 years. And it was only when WikiLeaks published a discussion paper in 2008 that it came to be public knowledge. Last year, President Obama signed an executive agreement to get the U.S. on board without asking for congressional approval.
Even though the precise terms of ACTA remain undecided, preliminary documents reveal many troubling aspects about the proposed agreement, such as removing legal safeguards that protect internet service providers from liability for the actions of their subscribers, in effect giving internet service providers no option but to comply with privacy invasions.
Anyone out there who's familiar with the internet service Mega Upload should pay attention, because the feds could very well be watching you. The Protecting Children from Internet Pornographers Act of 2011. Sounds harmless. In fact, it sounds very moral, doesn't it?
What they're doing is collecting all the websites you've been to over the last 18 months so they can use it against you at a later time.
And like, who cares about illegal wiretapping at this point? Like, now the government is pushing to make sure that internet service providers immediately hand over all this information about you, which websites you visited, what your activity is online. You're treated as a criminal and you have to prove yourself innocent.
You know, my personal preference is for the You Are All Criminals Act, which is shorter and I think more to the point, because it reverses the usual presumption that we do a search when we think a particular person is guilty. And the assumption behind this bill is we keep everyone's data, we make the company store everyone's information for the government because anyone might be guilty.
And now it looks like domestic drone use is going to come to an airspace near you. So that means that by September 30th, 2015, drones will be flying in the same airspace as airliners, cargo planes, business jets, and private aircraft, as the Associated Press described it.
Local police departments are now using Predator drones in order to basically spy on U.S. citizens.
More and more of our civil liberties being taken away, more and more Big Brother watching over us at all times. One point we wake up and we're the frog and we've boiled. And we go, how the hell did we wind up in this state? In this police state where they watch everything and U.S. citizens are targeted, sometimes without trials. Well, this is how we wound up in it. We told you about it every single day on the Young Turks. It's happening as we speak.
The police state we live in right now is so extreme that when I read this story, it wasn't that surprising to me, right? Do you want to feel comfortable with the fact that the government or local police departments can use a drone to follow you wherever you go, no matter what? It'll hover around your house while you're in there and follow you out of your house. Check out where you're going. What are you doing? This police state thing has gotten out of control.
A better eye in the sky. They're calling it the Blue Devil.
And here's what is interesting. With the Blue Devil, what they can do is they've got so many cameras on board, they can actually take a look and know exactly what's going on over 36 square miles. They've got these supercomputers on board that do all the figuring out about, okay, we just heard somebody right over there say this. How do we follow? Yeah, in fact, they're that optimistic, they say it's going to be in the sky on October 14th. In the meantime, they're still sewing up the Kevlar.
Security says people who oppose abortion or worry about the threat of illegal aliens could pose a radical threat to America. They're the ones we need to be watching at Homeland Security. Why are conservative values suddenly being singled out as a terror threat?
People who pay for small purchases in cash, like coffee or gum, apparently that's a big red flag. Big time. But the FBI sees a cash payment as a way for you to cover your tracks, blend in with the normal folk without leaving a trace. Now, one specific area that we've been warned about incessantly over the last few years is the threat of homegrown terrorism. And it's not just a line that was repeated by officials or put into reports. No, we saw the government act on it. We've seen one sting operation after another. The Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security has just released a report that shows that the feared wave of homegrown terrorism has not materialized. The report's author actually called it a minuscule threat to public safety. This threat has been inflated, but the facts do not back up the claims. And yet, what are the sacrifices that we've all been forced to make in order to be ready to counter it? What are the grave offenses that have been committed against our civil liberties? The power grabs that lawmakers have been able to make while selling us fear of a homegrown threat. That includes Miranda rights being curtailed for domestic terror suspects. We now have an indefinite military detention provision codified into law through the NDAA that was just signed by the president on December 31st of last year. There's a bill that's been pushed by members of Congress to strip Americans of their citizenship if they're accused of being associated with terrorism. So, all that we can get from Panetta's answer here is that the evidence doesn't matter. Due process in a courtroom to prove that evidence doesn't matter. If the government calls you a terrorist, they can kill you, and the rest of us are just supposed to take their word for it. This is part of the problem. The dangers of this overly expansive global war on terror is that anything can now be deemed a battlefield by the administration. You know, NDAA the president signed on December 31st of last year, the one that codified indefinite military detention into law, well, it's already being applied to legal rationale. But just so you know, it's already being used.
But the thing that makes it critical here is that the U.S. government unilaterally, without any proof, without any due process at all, is actually pointing the finger and saying, you, my friend, are a terrorist. So the question then becomes, if they get to decide, what makes you question whether or not they can't decide that it's you, or it's me, or it's my neighbor, or my father, or my son?
The federal government says it is taking steps to make the internet safer. This week, the Obama administration pressed ahead with plans to create an internet identification system for Americans.
Now you're telling us that the government is going to compile this information from passports and from state driver's licenses and put it in a national database.
Once you've created a system like that for that purpose, what other purposes might you put it to? Controlling access to health care? Controlling access to housing? How about gun control? Well, you create this system for one purpose, it can be used for just about anything. And you might see kiosks at every government building. It might be that on handheld devices, law enforcement officers would look you up in the National ID database to see if you're entitled to be in the country, or to see if you have tax obligations you haven't paid yet. What if you're in a dispute with the government? If you get crossways with the government, you could be de-identified.
A national biometric ID card is at the center of a new bipartisan immigration plan. Sounds like something out of the future.
Now, the nationalized ID that's being proposed, which includes retinal scans for Americans, fingerprints, vein mapping, and facial mapping. Why don't we just brand all the babies at birth?
The government taking a big new step, looking to build a huge database of people's physical characteristics. The FBI is taking on $1 billion project to gather fingerprints, palm patterns, even digital pictures of faces. Eventually, it could expand to include iris patterns, face shape patterns, scars, even information about how you walk and talk.
FAST stands for Future Attribute Screening Technology. Future attributes. Not the attributes you have now, the attributes you're gonna have and will be punished for later.
So this is straight out of Minority Report.
Thank God, though, because we didn't have enough of a police state. Best to try to figure out crimes before they happen and punish people for it. And this sounds like something that can't happen, but it can. It's incredibly real.
It will monitor, among other things, body movements, voice pitch changes. It'll also look at eye movements, body heat changes, and breathing patterns. And they're going to use all this information to try to predict whether or not you're going to commit a crime in the future, okay?
So watch out how you move your eyes, and if you're breathing too hard, it might cause you a problem. Do you want somebody with a bomb walking into a football stadium or an airport?
Yeah, that's their reasoning for everything. That's their reasoning for taking all of our civil liberties away. I'm not buying it, okay? They fearmonger, they use fear as a way to sell this bullshit. This is thought police. This is out of 1984. You can't think a certain way, because if you think a certain way, they're going to predict that you might do a crime in the future. It's unbearable. We got to stop this kind of stuff. Since 2001, the federal government has spent $34 billion on militarizing our local police enforcement. Recently, they talked about the school-to-prison pipeline.
I mean, people getting arrested for leaving class? You're kidding me?
You get arrested for being absent. You get arrested for spraying perfume on yourself. You get arrested for cussing at other students. If you don't get arrested and if you don't get sent to a juvenile detention center, you most certainly get a fine. In 2010, the police gave 300,000 Class C misdemeanors to children as young as 6 in the state of Texas.
They do have police departments inside the schools. Why? Because the 6-year-olds are about to riot? No, because they make money off of it. And one other terrible part of this is that it makes our kids into robots. You know, don't question authority, don't do anything wrong, you do something even slightly out of step with what a teacher wants, that's it. You're committing a misdemeanor, you'll be fined.
If, let's say it is a poor family and they do not have the money necessary to pay this fine, what happens is they put the fine on hold until the student is 17 years old. And then when the student is 17, they throw them in jail.
Oh, for Christ's sake, man. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, right? So, what are we doing, man? We're locking up half the country.
So private prisons, they're like businesses. Of course they want to, make as much money as possible. But think about how that affects you as a citizen of the United States, okay? They're looking to put people away for minor offenses, okay, for anything. That's why this war on drugs continues. It's because it's big business for these private jails, for these private prisons. So who knows what's next? Now all of a sudden you videotape a police officer and they're thinking about putting you away in jail.
And this is how we become a police state, where we privatize our prisons and then they buy our politicians and they have the motivation to arrest us all. We are by far and away the country that imprisons the greatest percentage of our population.
It gives the military the power to indefinitely detain American citizens, even those captured here in the United States, suspected, just suspected, not convicted, of some sort of involvement or affiliation with terrorism. So no trial, prison based solely on suspicion.
All without a court hearing or a trial.
The government may be preparing for some sort of martial law.
How alien would that be to see troops with rifles and helmets marching in our streets?
New questions tonight about an Army combat brigade being trained to deal with civil disturbances in the United States.
All in the name of the war on terror.
In the past, the wars ended, or the enemy ceased being an enemy. Now we have a different dynamic. Now we have this global war on terror that seems to always be expanding, and we're fighting something like terrorism that you can't necessarily get rid of. You can't eradicate it. So do you think that we're in some kind of danger where we won't be able to end it and go back to where we used to be?
Now, what's really happening here is an attempt to undermine a democracy and replace it with a corporate plutocracy or something that's profoundly anti-democratic. American people are starting to, they're like the canaries in the coal mine on this issue. They're starting to smell the poisonous gas of fascism creeping into our country.
Is this 1984?
This is 100% naked, classical 1984, in-your-face tyranny.
This is straight out of 1984. We're living in a police state. We have the government keeping these heavy files on us when we're completely innocent and doing nothing.
This is just scratching the surface.
But it's clear that despite the growing number of people that have come out opposing these bills, the government is going to continue waging its own war without the support of the American people, and even if these bills don't pass. The decisions made by our officials post 9/11 have put a very dark shadow over our actions as a country. But here's where I start to get a little bit frustrated. It's where the mainstream media that's supposed to be the government watchdog once again just starts reporting on these stories as if it's just any old conversation, and they forget about some of the darker practices that are still carried out the rest of the time. The mainstream media should realize, above all, that we have certain laws and standards for a reason in this country. So the politicians don't think that none of us are paying attention when our Constitution and our values are completely trampled on. But they'd like to pretend like it's just a simple tit for tat between Obama and the contenders trying to take his seat. He said, she said. Instead of he's wrong, all of you need to step back from the post 9/11 world of fear and paranoia that allows for the laws to be stretched and bent and decimated. And all of you need to come back to reality. This battle is just getting started.
We are no longer that generation that doesn't care. We are no longer that generation that's prepared to sit back and take whatever they give us. We are now the generation at the heart of the fight back. We are now the generation that will stand with everyone who's fighting back. We hope you'll show solidarity with us and send a strong message to this government that they can't throw their cuts at us. We're going to stand up and we're going to fight back.
One day, somebody's going to have to make a stand. One day, somebody's going to have to say enough.
If you don't fight for your rights, they don't exist, because power always wants to take them away. But our Constitution doesn't mean a damn thing if we, the people, don't stand up for it.
Yellow ribbons and lapel pins will not save this country. Be it with your lives, labor, or tax dollars, stop investing in your own oppression. Guard your communities from the police state. Don't waste a single vote or a single dollar on the two-party system. Do not be content merely to grumble and to march while they are using fear, force, and violence as weapons of oppression. We must embrace the opportunity to resist civilly while we still can. stand. American values have been nearly vanquished by consumerism, militarism, and authoritarianism.
A loose collective born on the internet, Anonymous has no official members and no hierarchy.
You know, law enforcement is intimidated by Anonymous.
We have no threats, but behold the power of the quill and ink.
We must, as a nation, once again, embrace defiance, rebellion, and resistance.
We are Anonymous.
We are Legion.
We do not forgive. We do not forget.
Do not fault us.